Hello, everyone. As you're coming into the webinar, we'll get started in just a moment. Really glad you're here. This is Katie Valentine. We're just giving people a chance to get in and get situated. And over on your right is a chat box, so everyone feel free, if you can hear me, let me know that you're here and say something in the chat box. Katie Valentine. Hi. Yes, I see you're here. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Mary Jo. Turn that off for a second. I just want to verify that everyone can hear me. If you can hear me, just type something into the chat box. Let me know that you are here. I see a couple of people. Cool. All right. Robin, our host, commented. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Paul. Great. Okay, it's great to see everyone here. I am going to go ahead and turn on my video. Change this layout a little bit. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Katie Valentine. I am the Director of Online Learning for Disciple Seminary Foundation. Really glad you're here. You are here. Congratulations and welcome, because you are here for our very, very first inaugural live webinar for this endeavor of online learning. So it's really, really exciting. And we are hosting our first two webinars, one tonight, one on Thursday night, during the week that has National Coming Out Day. And so we're really excited that our first two webinars are centered around that really exciting day. And today you are, of course, here to learn about LGBTQIA+, Deciphering the Alphabet Soup. So let me give you just a quick word about Disciple Seminary Foundation. We're a Disciples organization. We provide education, mentoring, networking, and financial support to seminary students who are affiliated with Disciples. And this is our first branching out into a new kind of learner, which is you and people in congregations who are parishioners, either your parishioners if you're a pastor, or your friends who are in your congregations. And those of you who want to figure all of this out, and we want to know what kind of education you are hungering for, what kind of education people in your churches are hungering for. So after this, I will probably be in touch so I can find out more about all of you. And just a little bit of orientation about the webinar platform here. You've all found the chat box, so that's great. Hi, Kate. You said hello since I started talking, so glad you're here. Down below are questions. So you'll see where it says questions, polls, and offers. So you can write in a question, and I'll be monitoring those and kind of pitch those to Robin during the places in the webinar where we may want to answer them. So I see Jennifer asked a question, so I'm going to answer. I'm going to try to answer. So she was asking if the webinar has started, so my suggestion is to refresh. If you get frozen or anything like that happens during the webinar, the basic answer is to refresh your browser and things should just start right again. So let me introduce our webinar facilitator and our teacher for today, and this is Robin Knauerhase. So I'm going to invite her to turn on her webcam. There she is. Hey, and she is joining us from Portland. Really, really glad that she's here. Robin is the moderator of Disciples LGBTQI+ Alliance, and she's a research scientist at Intel. And so we're very grateful that she has taken time out of her busy schedule of getting patents and doing research that benefits all of our lives and offering us this webinar. So Robin, I'll just turn it over to you, and I'm here for anything that you or anyone else needs. I'll be monitoring the chat and the questions as we go along.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to everybody.
Of course.
So Katie, were you going to put it in full screen mode, I think, for this part? Great. So as Katie said, I'm Robin, and I'm here today. I'm actually blessed to be the moderator of the Disciples LGBTQ+ Alliance. We recognize that that's a mouthful. So the shortcut for our group is the Alliance Q. Really proud to be working with the Disciples Seminary Foundation to co-sponsor this. I won't read the whole slide, but we've been around more than 30 years, working within the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and across denominations as we can, to have full inclusion of queer people into the full life and leadership of the church. There's our website at the bottom and our little hashtag. Everybody has to have a hashtag these days. All means all. So with that, let's start in. So what I hope that we'll get done in this call is, first of all, learn what the letters stand for. And even, like I say, even despite the name of the course, we'll do those letters and some others just as good background information. In addition to learning what they stand for, we'll learn what each word actually means and do a little bit of background concepts to help explain the meanings behind it. And if I do my job right, we'll end with a newfound appreciation of diversity in God's big, funny world. So, one disclaimer, language is a living thing. And within the community, there are people who say, no, I think this means this, or I think this means that, or whatever. So what I'm presenting here are, in my humble opinion, the current and best definitions for each term and the most useful terms. You may encounter people who prefer other definitions. Somebody will say, oh, I'm queer, but I'm not whatever. That's fine. And with the little symbol there, the little picture, as long as they don't hit you, that's fine. So language in this domain, as much as other domains, really does evolve over time. And we do this in the queer community, not for political correctness, but because we're actually recognizing the differences between different groups. If you just think, man, woman, man loves woman, woman loves man, bang, simple. But as you get into differences from that, we want to make sure that we recognize and acknowledge, or indeed honor or celebrate, the different communities that make up these the terms that we'll be talking about. Oops, sorry, that went forward twice. So, quick belief statement. I think we mostly have members of the Christian Church online, I suspect. But just for anybody, your presenter, that's me, in accord with the Alliance, but also Christian Church Disciples of Christ polity, as well as current status of medicine and psychiatry and so on, do not consider LGBTQ nature or actions or anything like that to be harmful or sinful or contrary to God's will for humankind. There's room for debate there, but not in this webcast, of course. And the nice thing is, as I point out at the bottom, it's 51 points if you put it on a triple word score. But of course, it's also not actually in the official Scrabble Players Dictionary. So, deciphering the alphabet soup. You may have seen LGBT, you may have seen LGBTQ, you may have seen all these other versions, and all of these abbreviations are okay. The intent generally is not to uninclude people, but sometimes people will shorten, especially in like the press and so on. New York Times, I believe, only uses LGBT, not because they don't care about the others, but it's just kind of unwieldy and that sort of thing. So it's not to exclude anybody. They're all good abbreviations, and they're all really hard to pronounce. They're initialisms rather than acronyms. And the one subset that I don't mention here, the BLT, is a delicious sandwich, but it's not relevant to our webinar today. So diving right in, the first category, or the first area that we want to discuss is sexual orientation. This is basically who people love. You may be familiar already with the terms heterosexual, which is somebody who's attracted to the opposite sex. And I put opposite in quotes because we'll learn through the call that there's not really necessarily always an opposite. There are differences that make it not just a binary choice. And then homosexual, of course, is somebody who's attracted to somebody of the same sex. So this will go quickly. These are kind of the basic ones. A lot of people are familiar with, but I wanted to make sure that we're all at the same level to start out, for the discussion. So a lesbian is a woman who's attracted to women. Very straightforward. We use the term gay for a man who's attracted to men. Now, we also will use the word gay for women attracted to women, just as a shorthand. If you need to distinguish a couple, that they're a gay couple or a lesbian couple, because that tells the listener or the reader who they are, that's useful. If it doesn't matter, you can just use gay because it's shorter and it's kind of the default word. There's also bisexual, which is a person who is attracted to both men and women. And this is not something where, in general, people will say, oh, they're just confused, or they're gay, but they don't want to admit it, so they say they like opposite sex people too. And it's actually, it really isn't. It's for people who identify as bisexual, it's a very specific category that says I'm willing to love men or women based on whatever factors I use for the person to fall in love over. And the last one, major category in this, is asexual. So an asexual person doesn't feel sexual or romantic attraction to other people. This doesn't mean that they don't have love, right? Mothers love their children. Pastors love their church members or flock. Best friends will say, oh, I love you. But it's different from that kind of, ooh, baby, sexual attraction kind of thing. So I said this part would go a little bit quick, but just to summarize, the terms that we've talked about, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and asexual, just talk about who you're attracted to. They don't say anything about who you are. There's not a value statement involved, like you're good or you're bad or you're evil or anything like that. It's just a statement. Who do you find attractive? And of course, the key thing is love is love. And you may have seen that in campaigns. You may have seen that in other things. It really is. And as Christians, we're kind of all about the love, whether it's friendly love, sex love, or whatever else. So I went through that part really quickly. So I have a little pause here. If anybody has questions in the chat window, or convey those to Katie. Okay, it was that easy. And I arranged things so I do have the chat window open, although I might not be focusing on it. So Mary Jo, I love that too. And in fact, my home church, First Christian Church in Portland, Oregon, we participate in the Pride Parade in Portland every year. And the t-shirts that we have actually say, love is love. It's really just that simple. How can anybody really be against love? So now that we're partway through our alphabet soup, not completed, but partway through, how would anybody like a refreshing beverage? So there's some background information I want to get into before we dive deeply into things. And that's the next phase here of the webinar. So most basic is sex assignment. So when a little baby is born, the doctor looks, where, and assigns a sex to the baby and says something like, congratulations, it's a girl or it's a boy. And that kind of worked for a long time, not perfectly, but over 1,000 years or something. But the thing is, sometimes that's not correct. And we'll get into the reasons why in the upcoming slides. But when it isn't, you get into the interesting cases that we'll be talking about today. So the two keywords here, and these are not necessarily in our LGBTQIA, but they're handy terms to know, are AMAB and AFAB. That's assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth. And when I mention that sometimes the phrasing is not correct, this is what we use to, if somebody is assigned male at birth, but later discovers that they actually are of a different sex, gender, then AMAB is a polite way of saying, I recognize you now as a woman, but you were assigned male at birth before. I see a question, AMAB and AFAB, are they new terms for everyone? They're in use in the queer community quite a bit, and we'll define queer in a minute. I'm sorry, I'm doing a use before definition. But in the LGBT community, it's used quite a bit because there's the need to discuss, oh, you're a trans man, therefore you were assigned female at birth. In general society, it's not super necessary, but in general, if you see a man, and you're talking to him like a man, or vice versa with a woman. You don't necessarily care what they were when they were assigned, at birth, because it doesn't really matter unless you're, their doctor or their lover or something like that. But the terms are handy, especially for the type of discussion we'll be having in this hour of how things are different based on how this assignment goes. Matthew, Katie, would you keep that question and I'll answer Matthew's thing when we get to the next question part? Okay, so there's also something intersex, and this is the I in our LGBTQIA. Intersex is there are certain genetic conditions that result in what doctors will call ambiguous genitalia. And because we're a family webinar, I don't have pictures or a lot of medical detail. But again, this is a case of, the doctor basically looks and says boy or girl. Sometimes it's not a clear answer, right? And if you look biologically, all of these structures come from the same sort of DNA and the same sort of fetal development and get distinguished well after, like, it's not distinguished at conception, it's distinguished as the parts develop. And I bring this up partially because it's a letter that we want to cover, but also historically, up until even as much as 20 years ago, the medical protocol said, oh, we're going to fix this. And they would then say it looks more like a penis than a vagina or something like that. And they would do surgery. Sometimes they didn't even tell the parents. And now we've learned, again, kind of over the last 20 years or so, that this is horrible. It's not up to a doctor or a surgeon to decide the day after a baby is born what it is. So the sort of, they call it reparative, I put that in kind of air quotes, sneer quotes. It's actually illegal in California, it's illegal in many countries worldwide. Additionally, as you learn about this, you may find cases where parents don't tell their children. Everybody wants their little baby to be perfect. And it's like, oh, gee, we don't know if it's a boy or a girl, so we had the doctor fix it. And they don't tell the kid till the kid realizes that it's of a different sex or gender identity than what they assigned it, or something else. So, like, oh, by the way, now that you're married, you can't have babies because at birth, we had this done to you. It's just unfortunate and it's cruel. And I bring it up here again. First of all, it's a valid thing in the LGBTQI acronym set. It's also something that a lot of people don't really think about, and there hasn't been a lot of discussion about it. But like I say, now there's, other states are considering laws to ban such surgeries and so on. So in the more usual case, I'm not saying normal on purpose, but in the more usual case, there's also the question of sex chromosomes. And, in high school biology, we learn that, if you're XX, you're a girl, and if you're XY, it's a boy, and it's just that simple. And people will use that sort of argument even now. And it's not necessarily that that's wrong, but it doesn't include all these other things that can happen, much more to the picture. So you can have children who are born with 3 sex chromosomes, XXX or XXY. There's a number of different possibilities. And then even if it's just XX or XY, there are things like XY with androgen insensitivity. So XY means a boy, but the baby grows up, acts like everything else, a girl until, puberty hits or something like that. And then undescended sex organs, like undescended testes, will appear and that sort of thing. So it's not quite as simple as what, Mrs. Johnson taught you in 9th grade biology. In addition to the chromosomal and genetic things, there are also structures in the brain that are different. There are some sizes and density of different regions that we notice in cisgender. I'll define that term coming up, but for now, I'll just say regular. Men, born men, feel like men, are themselves, they're just totally happy. And women will have different structures inside of the brain. Some of this is from birth, and it's why people are now talking about a transgender brain. I'm putting that in air quotes because it's not proven science, right? And as a scientist, I want to convey the current state, but not convey anything that's true that we haven't really proven or determined for sure. And the same thing, even after the baby is conceived, inside the uterus, there are various hormone washes that the mother produces that kind of literally wash over the baby. And those happening at different times or with different composition of the hormones can also change fundamental structures within the brain. So I bring this up in part because it's interesting, in part because for people who say, oh, God created boys, God created girls, and anything else is an abomination, it's actually not true. You may have the world may have thought that in 1500s, but we know now that there are lots more factors that we need to pay attention to. So the question then is, with all these different factors, who determines what's a boy and what's a girl, right? How do you tell? Well, this is where we come into gender identity. And this is a concept that I'll be bringing up a couple times. But your gender identity, whereas we talked about sexual orientation is who you love, your gender identity is who you are. So it's a self-expressed, innate feeling of a human being as male or female. And as I mentioned, this may be different from what you were assigned at birth. It may be different than your chromosomes. It may be different than your name. People choose a masculine name or a feminine name. And who better to know if you're a boy or a girl than you, right? It's something, it's a very core part of existing, of human existence and animals too. So that's identity. There's also gender expression. And this is using clothing or makeup or grooming or haircuts or whatever else, working out for buff muscles or not, that express masculine or feminine. So you may know, there's a term for lesbians, a butch lesbian, and that's somebody who is a woman who loves women, but unlike most women, presents in a more masculine fashion. They may have short hair. They may only wear plaid shirts. And I'm playing with a stereotype here. Don't take that literally. But the way you express is not necessarily the same as who you are, and it's certainly not necessarily the same as what your assignment at birth was. So just as a quick way of picturing this, you start off with sex assignment with all the factors we talked about. That feeds into your gender identity, right? Which is how you figure out when you're 3 or 5 or 30 if you're male or female, boy or girl. And that's a foundation both for gender expression, because in society we expect men to dress certain ways and women to dress certain ways, for better or worse. We still do, even in 2018. And that's a factor in your orientation, because in general, men love women and women love men, and that's how the species continues, right? But that identity box in the center, as I mentioned before, is a little bit tricky, because, gee, is your identity the same as your assignment? Is your gender identity the same as your sex assignment? If the answer is yes, then you're cisgender. I used that word once before. There's a formal definition slide coming up. And if it's not, then you're transgender. So now we dive into the T of LGBT ... So a transgender person has a gender identity that doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth. So, and trans is short. So if you don't feel like using all the syllables, you can say, oh, that's a trans man, or, oh, my friend Sandra is a trans woman, kind of thing. And the best estimates that we have now, and I say we as society, including medicine and psychology, not the Alliance Q or whatever, the best estimate is that as many as 1.5% of Americans are transgender. So there are other statistics, 4 out of 5 people have never met a trans person, or at least met a trans person that they knew were trans. But at 1.5%, there might be a tendency to say, oh, that's not a big deal. That your chances are better of winning a pick 3 lotto than this kind of thing. But if trans people were all together in a state, it would be the 40th state by population. It would be bigger by population than New Hampshire or Delaware or South Dakota or Wyoming. Oh, much bigger than Wyoming, because Wyoming and South Dakota are largely empty. No offense to people who live there. They're just big, not dense states. So now that we have this concept, and again, we have a pause coming up for questions if we need. With this concept, there are certain things about usage. How do we use these terms? What are the subtleties of what it means? So Transgender is an adjective. It's not a noun. It's not a verb. We'll come up with some of these. But if you have a woman who is assigned male at birth, then she is a transgender woman or trans woman. I mentioned before, you can shortcut. Same thing in reverse. A man who was assigned female at birth is a transgender man. Transgender is not a noun. You will hear people say things like, oh, those transgenders are having a parade, or, you know, Fred's a transgender, isn't he? It's not only bad grammar, but people will use the noun form of it to try to create strangeness, to create an otherness in the terminology. The easiest way to remember it is trans women are women, trans men are men. It really is just that simple. It doesn't matter what you were assigned at birth. You know what you are. So another thing you might see is transgenderism. It's not a term we use anymore. And it's, again, by making it transgenderism, it sounds like a disease. It sounds like something that could be cured. It sounds like, you know, like it makes other, you know, like those people over there have transgenderism and I don't. The example I use, and no offense to right-wing Christians, I literally just picked this one up off the web, you know, the obscene sight of celebrities promoting transgenderism for kids, as if you could convince somebody what their identity is, but that's a whole separate story. So try not to use that word, and if you see it, that's kind of a hint. That's you know, it's a little bitty red flag waving of, I should question the motives of the person I'm talking to here. They may be biased. You may have also heard the term transsexual. That's an old term. It's well, to be candid, it's largely from porn. People who are excited by that sort of thing in a fetish way, not in a genuine love kind of way, we'll talk about, oh, tranny porn or that sort of thing. So if today you find somebody who's trans and you befriend them and so on, and you say, oh, aren't you transsexual? They'll kind of react like it's a slur. Again, like I said at the very beginning with the slide of the guy getting hit in the jaw, some people don't find it offensive, but most people will. So if you're in your general interactions with people, whether you're teaching, whether you're talking, whether you're preaching, whether you're making friends or whatever, kind of avoid that word too. They're both, transgenderism and transsexual, are extremely impolite. So the last thing I'm going to say about this is, as far as usage stuff goes, is that it's also not a verb, right? We mentioned it's an adjective, and apologies to people who didn't remember some of their high school grammar. It's not a noun, it's not a verb. So if you say she transgendered 5 years ago, that's also incorrect. The verb that you want is to transition. So she transitioned 5 years ago. He transitioned when he was in 3rd grade, those sorts of things. And so transition is the process, because remember, transgender as an adjective just conveys something that exists. There's no sense of action to it. So the verb transition is the process by which one changes their body or their gender expression or their names or whatever else to match their gender identity. The classic example, and generally the before and after is not always in best taste because it's just kind of impolite. It's like, it focuses on who people were instead of are. But Caitlyn Jenner's been really open about this, and I appreciate that from her because we can use it for examples like this. She transitioned, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, and the result of her transition was very public, right? She was a well-known person when she was presenting as a man, and then she was on the cover of Vanity Fair for her coming out as a woman of transgender experience. So it's a very public transition. However, the details of her transition, like, gee, did she have jaw surgery, and did she have breast implants, and are those, you know, 36D or 38 double D? That she didn't release any of that because it's none of anybody else's business. So whatever you do, you as a transgender person, whether it's surgical means, hormonal means, or anything else, legal stuff, there's not a particular order you do things in. There's not a particular checklist. And some people will do it quickly, and some people will do it over a number of years. So transition, just like we use it in regular English, a transition is just this process of changing. And so that's the usage. hint there. So last but not least, certainly not least, we have cisgender. And I've used this term before, and I said I would get to it. This is fulfilling that. So a cisgender person, and just like we have transgender abbreviates to trans, we have cisgender that abbreviates to cis. A cisgender person is one whose sex assignment, generally at birth, matches their gender identity. They're a guy. When it came out of the womb, the doctor said it's a boy. He was right. They're a guy. They're happy being a guy, and off to the races. And the way to remember this is, it's from the Latin originally. Trans, as we know, is a cross, like transportation or whatever else. And cis is a Latin prefix. It means kind of the same side. It's not crossing. And you may have heard, trans fats. The city of New York outlawed trans fats in cooking because it's bad for you or something. There are also cis fats. And if you're if you're a dietitian or a chemist, you may talk, or organic chemist, you may talk about cis fats, but we don't hear it in general life because, well, nobody cares about cis fats. That's kind of the regular time. So trans across, cis same side. In the case of gender, trans is across gender, and cis is basically the same gender. So now I have a quick little exercise. What if we combine gender identity and sexual orientation? What does that even mean? So the part of the table we have here, a cisgender man, if that person loves a man, then they're gay. And if that person loves a woman, then they're straight, right? These are the terms we came across before. And if a cisgender woman loves a man, that's straight. And if a cisgender woman loves a woman, then she's a lesbian. But what happens for trans people? Gee, what does this even mean? So take just a second. If you want, you can enter in the chat, woman. But if somebody is assigned female at birth, transitions and becomes a man, a transgender man, and they love a man, what would you call them? Are they gay? Are they straight? Is there another word? Or what would you say? Well, I'll give you a hint. As we said before, trans men are men and trans women are women. So therefore, if somebody is assigned female at birth, let's say a darling little girl named Chastity, might even think Chastity Bono, Cher's daughter at the time. Well, she grows up, she turns 40 and says, you know what? This is not working for me. I'm a guy. Why was I pretending all this time? And she transitions to Chaz Bono and now is a trans man. Well, if a trans man loves a man, well, that's a gay relationship. If a transgender man loves a woman, that's a straight relationship. Why? Well, think back to the hint. Trans men are men. So the fact that Chastity Bono was born female and may have dated boys, I don't know much about her life, but may have gone, lived, air quotes, normally as a woman, figures it out, says, oh, nope, I'm transitioning. Well, she's a man. So therefore, trans man is just a man. So man loves a man. That's a gay relationship. A lot of times people they wonder about that. It's like, well, is this a gay guy who became a woman because he wanted to love men? And it's like, no. You're confusing the whole thing again. It really is just as simple as what's on this page. So, T, transgender, we talked about sex assignment, gender identity, gender expression, cisgender, and an idea of how trans relationships are more or less, almost exactly like cisgender relationships. So there was at least one question back in the chat.
So we have two.
I've seen it going by, but
and the first one is, how often are newborns incorrectly assigned?
I don't have the exact number here. It's kind of similar. I think it's around the 1%. So like out of a high school with 1,000 kids, one of them may be intersex or may have had ambiguous genitalia at birth. The best answer would be for the exact number. I mean, that's the order. It's like on the close order of 1%. If you want a precise number, I would Google it. But again, make sure you have an unbiased scientific source.
And I have a feeling there might be a lot of underreported.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thank you. because again, everybody's like, oh, here's my new baby. Isn't he perfect? Well,
Right.
nobody, even though none of us is perfect, almost by definition as Christians, you might think that. Nobody wants to say, look, here's my baby, he's imperfect, right? So you might tell your mom, you might tell somebody, but it's not generally a point of pride to say, oh yeah, you know what? His crotch was messed up, so we had to have the surgeon fix things. So yes, there is underreporting.
And the second question is about non-binary identities.
Oh, so yes, actually, okay, didn't see who asked that, and I'm not going to scroll back.
That was Mary Jo.
Oh, okay, gold star. We will touch on that in the next section.
Awesome.
But yeah, we still have some slides to go, and we're making really good time actually. So if people have more questions or whatever, I'm going to turn off my camera and take a sip of pop.
Yes, anyone, more questions are welcome, either in the chat box or in the question box below. And I hit a wrong button with Mary Jo's question. Sorry about that. Make sure that it got asked verbally. I accidentally marked it as answered, and the technology is not kind and doesn't let me undo that. So.
Okay, so let's dive on. We'll dive in further. So, gee, does that cover everything? Aren't there other things that I've heard about that aren't in your talk, Robin? Well, the answer is there are other related categories. And for a long time, again, historically, transgender was an umbrella term. So if somebody was non-binary, we called them trans. If somebody was intersex, we called them trans. Even though an intersex person, regardless of their genitalia, they don't feel like they're a different gender than they were assigned. They just maybe weren't assigned, kind of thing. So I for our talk, I have parceled those out into a separate thing because you can use the term transgender in a broad way to cover everything that's not just cisgender normal 99% stuff. But again, as I said at the beginning, we don't want to erase people. We want to acknowledge that there are differences. We want to celebrate those differences. We want to honor that with the journey they went through to discover those differences and so on. So one category that we haven't talked about is gender fluid. So the term is also genderqueer. Some people will distinguish for a 101 level webinar. I'm not distinguishing. Let's use them synonymously here. But a person who's gender fluid or genderqueer has a gender identity, and remember, who picks their gender identity? They do, because who knows better than them? That's neither fully male or female. So they may mix gender expressions. They may go back and forth according to their mood or according to their experience. I have a friend who's a manager at a high-tech company who has two people in his group who randomly show up in a dress or in a shirt and pants. Not, again, women can have shirt and pants and so on, but with makeup, without, and they're just fluid. It's like, oh, that's how I felt today. The person in the picture here, this was actually at the Oscars this year. This person goes by they because they don't feel like a he or a she, and actually had a gown made, but with some masculine elements for the purpose of going to the Oscars. And I know this person. I started to say this guy, but that's wrong. I know this person. And they actually had they got selfies with like Meryl Streep and somebody else, some famous people who said, oh, I love your outfit, kind of thing. But if you say, are you a boy or a girl? Their answer is no. There's also agender. And so this is a person, if they don't have a gender identity that matches male or female, and they don't feel like they're a blend of the two. And again, it's not a usual case, but none of these things are the usual case because we all learned about those, back in high school. Pardon me. So if you say I'm not a blend, I'm not part male, part female, I don't buy into that. Gender is a social construct. We're all human beings. Well, that's the term agender kind of applies to you. Next category is a crossdresser. So cross-dressers are people who wear clothing of the opposite sex, and again, I'm putting opposite in sneer quotes there. So their gender expression, like we talked about, doesn't match their identity. So their identity does match what they were assigned at birth. So, you know, the person, let's pick the person on the right, the guy. They live as a guy. They feel perfectly okay being a guy. They don't feel like they're female, but for whatever reason, they like dressing as a woman. So it could be for fun. It could be for costume. It could be for fetish purposes. It could be for emotional release. There's any number of reasons that one might do this, and that's kind of okay. So both examples here are of cisgender men cross-dressing. Pardon me again. Because women in our society can also cross-dress, but you know, wearing a shirt and tie is not necessarily masculine anymore. You know, you can have certain types of tie or whatever else. Nobody checks which way the button's button. So in contemporary Western society, a woman can wear male clothing for whatever that means, and it's kind of okay, or it's totally okay. I mean, even. This is another case where society has evolved over time in the same way that 50 years ago we used to operate on babies, and 50 years ago we used to think that gay people were diseased. 50 years ago you could be arrested walking around the streets of Portland or Denver or Houston if you were wearing clothes that the cop thought weren't sufficiently, well, in this case, masculine. So there's still a little bit of stigma around it, but there really shouldn't be. This is just a thing. It's just who people are. Then, and this is the part that everybody likes because RuPaul, and if you haven't seen RuPaul, that's okay. But he's kind of the popular embodiment of this now, is a drag queen. So a drag queen puts on a female gender expression. I put sometimes exaggerated. The examples here are a little bit over exaggerated, right? Not a lot of women would dress this way just to go to dinner or whatever. Again, nothing wrong with it, but it's exaggerated. It doesn't have to be, but they put on this female gender expression for performance reasons. So you go to a bar and they say, oh, it's drag night, and they'll have some wonderful, beautiful, hot, whatever you want to call it, women walking around, and they're actually guys. Shocker. So most of the time, they're actually completely happy in their gender identity. So they're guys, right? In the case of a drag queen, they're a guy, and when they're done, they wash it all off and they go out as a guy. And they're happy in their sexual orientation. Now, that doesn't mean that they're straight, right? There are lots of gay guys who do drag, but the point is, that's okay. They're happy. They're not dressing up for the purpose of finding other men to date or whatever. It's performance. And at the end, they wash it all off, probably taking lots of Noxzema and water, but it all goes away. It goes in the closet or whatever, no pun intended. And they're themselves. So just out of curiosity, the word drag actually originates as an acronym for dressed as a girl, D-R-A-G, like that. And it doesn't look like anybody has asked, but yes, there are also drag kings. And it's more or less depending on where you live. But for example, in Portland, there are lots of women, regular women, who perform as men the same way that a drag queen performs as a woman. And people applaud and give them dollar bills or whatever else. So that said, we've covered a lot of stuff. We're not done yet. For sexual orientation, again, we talked about being lesbian or gay or bisexual or asexual. For gender identity, we talked about trans and intersex. We covered some non-binary identities, right? And I didn't actually make a slide for it. Actually, pardon me 1 second. I'm going to take another drink. We don't have a specific slide for non-binary, but the things that we looked at as far as drag queen, cross-dresser, agender to some extent, and so on, are, if you look at male-female as a binary, right, 1, 0, 1, opposites, well, non-binary is stuff that's in the middle. And so we had some good examples of non-binary stuff in the middle. And then the question that comes up is, wait, you may say, sitting at home in Columbus or Providence or whatever, I'm keeping track. I was promised all the letters. We're at least 2 letters short. And it's not the official policy of DSF, but we will cover everything we promise or you get double your money back. So that said, the Q. And I mentioned this before, Q for queer is an umbrella term. And this one really is actually an umbrella term. You know, if you're gay, you may say I'm part of the queer community. If you are a drag queen, you may say, oh yes, I love queer people. There's some, and all my friends are queer or something like that. So it covers this whole spectrum, 3 different spectra actually, of orientation, identity, and expression. And the most common case you'll hear is queer community. And again, if we spell out LGBTQIA, for example, which some people might do, right? Again, that's why we put the plus sign in some cases. You still might leave somebody out. And the goal is not to ever leave people out on purpose. So saying queer is a shortcut, so you don't have to say LGBTQIA kind of thing. And the again, just as sort of a linguistic curiosity, the original meaning of this, and you may find older people in or out of the queer community who will get really upset and they'll say, I don't like the term queer. It's mean, it's a slur. And, like think about pre-World War II England, right? There were gay guys in England, and the term fag actually has a couple different meanings in British English. And they needed something bad to call these gay guys, so they call them queer. And in the same way that African-American people have reclaimed the N-word, and people will say, this used to be a slur, but dang it, I'm proud of this. Queer really has come around that way. It's like, okay, you may mean it as a bad thing, but we don't care. We're actually proud of this thing that you're trying to make us feel bad about. And so there are cases, and again, like, I don't mean to stereotype too much, but it really does tend to be older people, not in a bad way, just in an experience way, who will not like the term queer. But in general, they're a vast minority. So you always want to honor somebody's you don't want to make them feel bad. If they think that you calling them queer is an insult, don't do that. Pick a different word. Pick LGBTQI or something else. But 9 times out of 10, you'll run into people who are just fine with queer, right? It's a common term. It's younger people, especially millennials, are just, oh yeah, queer, not a big deal. Oh, and I do see a thing from Jennifer. Do you mean that older queer people? Do you mean older queer people who don't like the word? Actually, for older non-queer people, they don't think it's so bad because it doesn't insult them. Whether or not they feel bigoted against queer people, whether or not they hate gays, whether or not they think that trans people are going to hell, or whatever they may think, it's not offensive to them because you're not calling them queer. But progressive older people will recognize that it has been a reclaimed word and say something like, oh, you shouldn't, please don't use that word, it's offensive. Okay, sorry, I'm following up on Jennifer's thing. So they don't get the slur even though it's of their generation. I think a lot of older people will get the slur, but they just don't feel it personally, right? If I am an 80-year-old lesbian woman and you call me queer and I say, that in my day, that I'd knock you out for that, it's because they feel it personally. But an 80-year-old cisgender straight man might very well, it's like, fine, call them queer. I don't care. It's those people. It's those queers, right? So it's a slur regardless, but people don't take it personally if they're not in the queer community. So Q and A, I think, were the last 2 we were talking about. So here's A, and this is actually a crucially important one. A for ally. So an ally is a person who supports queer people, whether that's in society, whether that's in voting, because North Carolina wants to say trans people can't use the correct bathroom, and no offense to people who live in these places, Alabama wants to make it illegal for same-sex couples to adopt children. They want to put it in the law. Well, one thing the allies will do is vote and say, no, that's a bad law, even though it doesn't affect me. In friendship, right? Somebody comes to church and then the next day they bring their wife and these two women are holding hands and you say, hey, let's go out to dinner, friendship, and in any number of other ways. So both of these illustrations I picked on purpose. One is the sky that holds the rainbow, because while queer people, of course, are generally allies to queer people, the regular, normal, run-of-the-mill, cisgender, straight, identity equals assignment at birth people, it would be easy to say, oh, I don't care what happens to 1.5% of the population, or 8% if you're talking about homosexuality, or 1% if you're talking about intersex. I don't care, that's a minority, I don't care. Well, somebody who really does recognize the societal challenges that people have had, the psychological challenges that people may have had in discovering who they are in terms of orientation or identity, and even if you don't totally get it, like, oh, I took this great webinar, but I still don't really understand what it's like for a man to love another man, you don't have to get it. Being supportive is really what matters. And without allies, the queer community would just be kind of up the creek without a paddle, in all kinds of ways. So the other one with the rainbow tulip, right? I'm not gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, pansexual, intersex, or asexual. I just have this idea that everyone should have equal rights. Yes, congratulations, that makes you an ally. Thank you, right? Thank you very much. So again, without the majority of people who say, even though this doesn't affect me, I care about it, it's just like civil rights, right? When white people have historically been a vast majority, but that didn't stop white people from being anti-slavery because it didn't affect them, kind of thing. So, in conclusion, first thing is, did we decipher all the letters or double your money back? We got the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, the I, and the A. Did we cover what they mean? I hope so. And if not, well, we have some time for questions at the end. And explaining the concepts about how they're used and so on. Again, I hope so. So if this, in what we promised and what I promised back at like slide number 3, I hope I succeeded. And so yay, let's all jump up in the air. So the last thing, and like I say, we do have time for questions, but a little bit more information about the Alliance, just because I skipped over, I went very quickly at the beginning. I used the term open and affirming, but I didn't fully define it. So open and affirming churches are ones that explicitly welcome queer people, as well as anybody else, right? Regardless of race or whatever, who knows what, into the full life and leadership of the church. And you might, especially among Christian churches, we say everybody is welcome at the table, but there are even DOC churches that say everybody's welcome at the table unless you're gay, in which case you're not welcome at this table. So what the Alliance does is work with churches wherever they are at in the process. In some cases, it's like, we've been loving everybody for 20 years. We just want to make it official. Or I'm afraid if we welcome gay people, that half the church is going to quit. Wherever you are in that process, the Alliance has resources to help move forward along that path. And not everybody's going to get there tomorrow, although that would be great. But it's our mission for 30 years and ongoing is to help the Christian church basically have a place at the table for everybody, regardless of their gender expression and sexual orientation. So if this is something that your church would like to consider, and I don't mean this to sound like a sales pitch, right? We're church group. We're not making money off of this. But we'd be delighted to offer resources. We offer training. We have a wonderful curriculum for how to graciously have this conversation and how to introduce these concepts in the way that you don't have half the people quit your church or whatever if they're either bigoted or if they just don't know enough to know why God loves everybody. So here's our website again. And we're at every General Assembly, and we're doing more things now where we're showing up at regional assemblies with a table. Come by and say hi. First of all, you'll see that they're just nice, wonderful people. And not everybody in the Alliance is queer, of course, but be happy to talk to you about our personal experience in most cases, or what's an example of another church that did this successfully, or how do you exactly handle this what if a trans woman wants to teach Sunday school? Well, the answer is she's a woman. Do women teach Sunday school? They can, so yes. But the little situations that come up, we really have built up a good body of knowledge and experience for how to handle these kind of things without, I don't want to say without ticking people off, but without violating our commandment to love even people who might not love us or who might not love the queer community. And I think it's mostly, like I say, a Christian church, a DOC crowd here, but similar organizations exist for Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, even Mormons have a group that are working for LGBTQ equality in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So with that, that's what I have for slides. I think, Katie, we've got a couple minutes before the hour is over, but I'm available, and I believe Katie is too, if we want to have any questions, discussion, or interactive, just whatever we want to do next.
Yeah, and everyone, please thank Robin. So you're all clapping from your households. If you can write your thanks and appreciation for her in the chat box, that would be grand, so that we can all see that. And I see that we do have one question about pansexual. And so there's a whole host of identities that we didn't actually discuss today, because the alphabet soup continues on beyond LGBTQIA+. So that plus part is really important. So Robin, I'll certainly defer to you in a moment if you want to give a quick definition. And I will say that one of the things that we are exploring is offering a little more substantial training. So this hour is beautiful, and we want to know what you are taking away from this and what your additional questions are. And we're exploring perhaps having Robin teach a short course on this sometime in late 2018 or early 2019. And we're kind of wondering from you, would that be valuable? And then we could discuss these other identities like pansexual in greater depth, and even talk about once your church becomes inclusive on paper, what's the next step to be truly inclusive, right? And how do you explain pansexual to an established congregation or a new congregation? So I'll give that little query for the group, so I can hear from you what else would be helpful, what else you want to know, and how you want to dive in deeper. And then now that I haven't answered the question about pansexual, let me turn that over to Robin.
Well, and I should add just quickly first, now that you guys have heard this and so on, feel free to use this knowledge in talking to other people. Like I say, some people may say, oh, I identify as this and I think you're wrong. But take this into your churches, take this into your community, just to help understanding, because there are lots of cases where it's easy to hate things that you don't understand. And increasing the understanding now that you have even just the stuff we talked about here, is really helpful. It's a way to be a good ally. And second of all, if you skipped over something or your dog barked or whatever, I think, Katie, this will be available later for replay, right?
It will, and this will be, you'll get an email from Webinar Ninja, the platform that we're using, so you can watch the replay here, and we will also host it on the Disciple Seminary Foundation website, and I will send out an email to everyone who attended. And I got a couple of emails right before this who time zones had gotten mixed up, and I know some of you had like choir rehearsals at your church, so we'll make sure that you have the opportunity to watch it. And I do want to make sure that everyone has my email, which is kvalentine@dsf.edu. I'm going to type that into the chat box, so you can email me anytime with questions, ideas, or wanting to know more.
Great. So, so the question about pansexual, there are several identities that are more current and more evolving. So pansexual is basically, sorry, let me back up a second. At the beginning, we talked about the, like binary as like male, female, nothing in between. It's just a choice, either or. And we covered some of the things that blend that a little bit. Well, there are people who feel that bisexual encourages people to think of male female as a binary. It's bi. There's two, right? I like both of them. Pansexual is a way for people to express explicitly that they also like trans people. They may like agender people. They may like drag queens. They may like gender fluid people. And so the term pansexual pan is, I think, originally Greek in this case. We can ask the seminarians among us to correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, yeah. So we could have a hashtag pan means pan. But what I mean is pansexual is a way of expressing that you don't only love men or women, but in addition to loving both of those, or being interested in and attracted to, love, that's a bigger question, that you're acknowledging that there are other things.
And so is that part of sexual orientation or gender identity?
And you're interested in them also. Well, it's for the person who identifies as pansexual, it's their orientation because it's who they love. And for the people being loved or being the object of attention, they have an identity, and pansexual means I'm interested in this, in whatever identity you may have.
So I love the comment that just came in.
So for the person who's identifying as pansexual,
relate this webinar to Doctor Who. So kudos on that. That's amazing. And so the comment is, the Doctor Who, the TV show, has a pansexual character named Jack Harkness around 10 years ago. And there might be a lot of kids today who grew up thinking nothing of the term. And that's definitely true. And for my work in camps, I found my camp kids, whenever I've hosted a workshop on something like this, like for teenagers, they all attend because some of them are a little embarrassed that they don't know. And so it's like half know and then half don't. And there's always, there's evolving identities all the time that people are learning about. So I don't see any other questions. But
well, I was scrolling back real quick. So Sandra, you mentioned your church is in the O&A discernment process. Great, yay, that's wonderful, good for you. I hope you are plugged in with the Alliance. Like all the resources we have and so on are available, both people and training and that kind of thing. If you're not plugged in, send Katie mail, who will send it to me, and we'll get you plugged in. And Joanne also mentioned as a queer United Methodist clergy, first of all, I love how accepting the Methodists have been, well, half the Methodists have been, but they're really, the denomination is really actively taking on this kind of question, which makes some people happy and some people very worried. But, giving this presentation to a retirement home. It's actually more important than you might think, because there are all kinds of cases now, as people age, where you get somebody, two men who've been a happy gay couple for 30 years, and it comes time to retire, and one gets infirm and they want to move into a home, but the attitudes among older people are occasionally less flexible, should I say? And so the people who come into a nursing home or a retirement home or that sort of facility, right, continuing care kind of thing, get all kinds of discrimination, and they're not plugged in, and nobody invites them to play chess, or nobody invites them to watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, because it's those gay guys. And so having this kind of understanding and this kind of lack of fear in a nursing home community is actually
let me again thank Robin. She's taken lots of her time and been so enthusiastic, and just a pleasure to work with. And we're looking forward to more offerings in the future. And lots of you wrote in that you would like to maybe see a short course or see some expanded information. So that's something that we'll be getting, we'll be getting the word out about where we are in that process pretty soon. I want to also invite everyone to our webinar on Thursday. So it's Thursday, 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. So whatever time zone you're in. This one was at 5. The one on Thursday is at 5:30. And that is being offered by Eric Smith. And he is a professor at ILIF Seminary in Denver. And this is on National Coming Out Day. And so we've orchestrated these two webinars, the wonderful one that you've just attended now and the one on Thursday, specifically for this week. And the title of that webinar is Can Paul be an ally, reclaiming the apostle from misogyny and homophobia? So I'm curious how many of you here have ever had the words of Paul used in the name of homophobia or misogyny? Raise your hands, make a comment so we'll know. I don't think I'm the only one, right? Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to know like how to respond in the moment, right? So Eric will be, yeah, so I see lots of yeses coming about that. And so he will be here to lead us through that process. And the name of Eric's book that will be out later on in a few months is Learning to Love the Apostle You Love to Hate. And so that's kind of the premise for the information that he'll be giving us. That'll be really fun. I'll be looking forward to seeing you there. Oh, someone's reading Romans. Yeah, you need this webinar then, because Romans 1 is where all the action happens, right? That's where some of those kind of, it's one of those texts that gets thrown in people's faces a lot. And actually, I really love the letter to Romans. So that's something we need to figure out. So yeah, so I'll see lots of you on Thursday. If you can't be there, it'll be the same process where we'll have this webinar and then it'll be available later on. And again, we'll be wanting to know where you want us to expand. We want to be able to serve you, you who are attending. So let us know that. So yeah, I see lots of you will be there on Thursday. Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps us up. Robin, any parting words?
Just thank you for attending. I know at least one person said that they were queer in the comments, but if you're not, if you're an ally, thank you especially for attending, because what I said at the end is really, it's truly heartfelt. We're all in this together, and as Christians, they'll know we're Christians by our love.
That's the perfect ending. I can't think of anything
being
better. So
interested
we will say amen and farewell to everyone. And thank you so much for attending. Be in touch with me so we can know how to serve you best. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.